you are breathing right now. You do not even think about it. Your lungs pull in air, your blood grabs the oxygen, and your body stays alive. Every animal you have ever seen does the exact same thing. We assume oxygen is the absolute, non-negotiable rule for life on this planet. We assume that if you take the oxygen away, everything dies. That is what modern science thought for a very long time. But the ocean is hiding something terrifying. Right now, beneath the surface of the world's oceans, there are massive, suffocating pockets of water where oxygen simply does not exist. Scientists call them dead zones. They sound like empty graveyards. We picture them as barren stretches of water where fish float to the surface and nothing moves in the dark. But here is the part that changes everything. They aren't dead. Something is living down there. Something that doesn't need to breathe. And the deeper you look into these suffocating pockets of the ocean, the more you realize that the creatures surviving in the dark are not just defying the rules of biology. They are completely rewriting what it means to be an animal on Earth. To understand how strange this is, you have to understand what a dead zone actually is. It is not a physical barrier. You cannot see it from the surface. If you take a boat out into the Gulf of Mexico or the Baltic Sea on a bright summer day, the water looks perfectly normal. The waves crash. The sun reflects off the blue surface. But if you dive down, the chemistry of the water begins to change. The oxygen levels drop. They keep dropping until they hit zero. This happens naturally in certain deep parts of the sea known as oxygen minimum zones. But it also happens because of us. When heavy rains wash millions of tons of agricultural fertilizer off our farms and into the rivers, those chemicals eventually dump into the ocean. All that nitrogen and phosphorus acts like steroid food for phytoplankton. These microscopic plants multiply by the trillions, creating massive green blooms on the surface. Then they die. Trillions of tiny plant corpses sink to the bottom of the ocean. Bacteria start eating them, and as those bacteria feast on the dead plants, they consume all the oxygen in the water. They literally breathe the ocean dry. Any fish or crab caught in this invisible suffocating cloud has to swim away fast, or it dies in minutes. The water becomes a toxic, anoxic wasteland. By all known laws of biology, nothing larger than a single-celled bacteria should be able to survive there, but biology was wrong. In 2010, an Italian marine biologist named Roberto da Navarro was studying a place called the l'Atalante Basin. This is a very specific, very hostile location sitting deep at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. It is what scientists call a hypersaline anoxic lake. It is a pool of water resting on the ocean floor that is so densely packed with salt and toxic hydrogen sulfide that it refuses to mix with the normal seawater above it. Da Navarro and his research team dropped a heavy metal corer down thousands of meters into the pitch black water. They drove it into the mud at the bottom of this toxic lake and hauled the thick black sludge back up to the surface. The mud smelled strongly of rotten eggs. It was saturated with sulfur. There was absolutely zero oxygen in it. The team expected to find some weird bacteria. That was all that could possibly live in a place so hostile. Instead, they found animals. They found tiny, complex, multicellular creatures with heads, mouths, and digestive systems living completely submerged in the toxic mud. These animals belonged to a group called Loricifera. They look like microscopic jellyfish wearing heavy armor plates. The researchers were confused. They assumed these animals must be dead shells that simply drifted down into the toxic lake from the healthy water above. But when they analyzed the samples, the truth was undeniable. The animals were alive. They were reproducing. They were spending their entire life cycle completely deprived of oxygen. No one had ever seen anything like it. It was the biological equivalent of finding a human being living happily on the surface of Mars without a spacesuit. This discovery completely shattered our understanding of animal life. Every animal on Earth has tiny power plants inside its cells called mitochondria. Your cells have them. Birds have them. Whales have them. Mitochondria take the food you eat and the oxygen you breathe, and they combine them to create the energy that keeps you alive. Without oxygen, your mitochondria shut down. You suffocate. But the armored Loricifera pulled out of the Mediterranean mud did not have mitochondria. Somewhere in their evolutionary past, they threw them away. Instead, they possess completely different cellular organs called hydrogenosomes. These bizarre little power plants do not need oxygen at all. They generate energy by processing the toxic hydrogen sulfide that kills almost everything else. These animals are literally breathing poison, but they aren't the only ones exploiting the suffocating dark. Move away from the toxic lakes of the Mediterranean and look at the deep waters off the coast of California. Here, you find the natural oxygen minimum zones. These are deep layers of the ocean where the oxygen hangs at barely 1% of normal levels. This is the home of Vampiroteuthis infernalis, the vampire squid. Despite the terrifying name, the vampire squid is not a monster. It is a survivor. Most squids and octopuses are fast, aggressive predators that burn massive amounts of energy and require highly oxygenated water. But the vampire squid chose a different path. It abandoned the rich, breathable waters near the surface and retreated into the dead zones. It survives there by fundamentally altering its own blood. Human blood uses iron to carry oxygen. That is why it is red. The vampire squid uses copper. Its blood is filled with a specialized protein called hemocyanin, which turns the blood blue. This copper-based blood is incredibly efficient at grabbing onto the tiniest, almost non-existent traces of oxygen in the water. The squid floats in the dark, barely moving, burning almost no energy. It doesn't hunt, it just waits. It survives by eating marine snow, which is a polite scientific term for the dead skin, waste, and rotting animal matter that drifts down from the bright world above. The dead zones are not empty. They are sanctuaries for the strangest things on the planet. The vampire squid deliberately seeks out the suffocating water because it knows that the fast, aggressive predators with their red blood and high metabolisms cannot follow it down there. The lack of air is a shield, but this is where the story gets deeply unsettling. For millions of years, these anoxic zones were stable. They were isolated pockets tucked away in the deep ocean, functioning exactly as they were supposed to. But right now, the map is changing. In 2018, biological oceanographer Denise Breitberg published a massive comprehensive study in the journal Science. Her team looked at decades of data tracking the oxygen levels across the global ocean. The results were alarming. Since the 1950s, the ocean's dead zones have quadrupled in size. We are feeding them. Every year, modern agriculture pours thousands of tons of synthetic fertilizers into the rivers. All those nutrients bleed into the ocean, triggering those massive phytoplankton blooms. The bacteria eat the dead blooms, pull the oxygen out of the water, and the dead zones expand. And it is not just fertilizer. The ocean is getting warmer. Basic physics dictates that warm water simply cannot hold as much dissolved oxygen as cold water. As global temperatures rise, the ocean is physically losing its grip on the air. These suffocating zones are creeping closer to the coasts. They are expanding into the shallow waters where most of the world's commercial fish live. Crabs, shrimp, and schooling fish are suddenly finding themselves caught in invisible traps. Sometimes they wash ashore in the millions. Sometimes they just die quietly on the bottom. We think of the ocean as a permanent, unchanging force. We think it is too big to break, but the ocean is literally losing its breath. The zones of toxic, oxygen-starved water are spreading, claiming more territory every single year. Think about what that actually means. When astronomers look out into the universe, they search for signs of oxygen on distant exoplanets. We use oxygen as the ultimate fingerprint for life. We assume that if a planet doesn't have a breathable atmosphere, it must be a dead rock. We spend billions of dollars building telescopes to look for alien life in the sky. But the aliens are already here. They are living in the black mud of the Mediterranean. They are floating quietly in the deep Pacific. They are creatures that run on copper blood and hydrogen batteries. They do not need the sky. They do not need plants. They do not need us. We spend so much time worrying about whether humans will survive the next century. We worry about cities flooding and storms getting worse. We focus on the things we can see from land. We completely ignore the chemical shift happening in the dark water below. By dumping our waste and heat into the ocean, we are systematically dismantling the breathable layers of the sea. We are wiping out the fish, the mammals, the familiar life forms that share our biological rules. We are creating an environment that is deeply hostile to anything with a backbone, but we are not destroying life. We are just handing the ocean over to something else. As the dead zones grow, the armored loricifera and the copper-blooded squids will not suffer. They will thrive. We are slowly terraforming our own planet to match the toxic ancient conditions of the deep past. We are building a world perfectly suited for the things that breathe poison. Survival has never been about who is the strongest. It is about who can adapt when the rules of the game change. We built our entire civilization on the assumption that the air will always be there, and the ocean will always be full of life that looks like us. We are loud, fast, and constantly burning energy. But down in the suffocating dark, there is a completely different kind of patience. The ocean is holding its breath, and the things that live in the dead zones are perfectly fine with that. They have been here long before humans learned how to build boats, and they will be here long after the last fish drowns. They are just waiting in the dark.